AmCham is 115 years old this year. We're still relevant after 115 years is because we're having such a big impact to our members. To be a member of AmCham, you have to be doing business between the two countries or promoting business between the two.
Advocacy is extremely important to the Chamber.
AmCham presents itself as a platform for getting together with other like-minded business leaders and putting our views across.
AmCham has really put a lot of value in my company.
They were very useful in connecting the industry, in promoting what is right and what is good for the Philippines in general.
AmCham has been constantly providing us with assistance for us to be able to understand the new regulations, to understand the pressing issues that we have locally.
It's been very helpful for us in terms of business updates, current issues, national issues, concern, and it also gives us access to different sectors.
My experience with AmCham in Philippines has arguably been the best in my career.
And we can use the AmCham to effectively get our message across, and the AmCham can open doors to practically anyone in government.
AmCham is interesting. It has very good events, up to date, and good people, a good network.
I think this is perhaps the most vibrant business chamber.
We see the members of AmCham actually as ambassadors to the United States. Although we're officially the diplomats here, we also see the business owners as diplomats representing the United States, representing U.S. value, representing U.S. quality.
AmCham has been hugely supportive. It's such a great source of information.
We always do, and that's hand out a lot of business cards and make sure that they can create business among themselves.
The strength of our business is actually in the strength of the relationships that we can develop with existing customers and find prospective customers.
It gives you a great opportunity to meet highly professional people and network with them.
AmCham meetings and luncheons really help foreign business and local business understand better the environment they're doing business in and the dynamics that are driving all facets of their business.
Being an AmCham member at smaller companies, because the business environment, if it's improved for them, they're more able to do their work of business.
Ford has been with AmCham for, I say, 20 years.
When you're being represented by a group like AmCham, you can be sure that you have the right to free speech and you can be as honest as you can, which is not really present when you're speaking on your own.
To be here. I get to meet a lot of people, so it's a networking dream.
It's a great partnership, and we're thrilled that it's such a good partnership through more than 100 years.
It's been a great source of learning, personal satisfaction, and as well as tremendous partnership.
The American Chamber here sets itself head and shoulders above the rest.
Voice, and that voice is extremely powerful when you put the 775 member companies together, a board of directors, 20 plus full-time employees with the chamber, all working towards common goals, and it's very, very powerful and very, very beneficial to your business.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So we are about to start in a bit. We're just waiting for more attendees to come in. So here we go.
So I think we can, this is John, I think we could start. We have almost 70 people. We have a lot of speakers and a lot of content. If that's all right, I may ask that, my name is John Forbes and I'm the project director of AmCham-RESPOND and a senior advisor of AmCham and co-chair of our legislative committee. And Maganda Hapon, welcome to this event. And I have two colleagues that are giving welcoming remarks. And if we could start with our distinguished gray-haired executive director from Texas, where he's happy to be in the warm Philippines right now, Mr. Hitchcliffe.
Okay, that was just a test to see how many of you could read lips. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. It's welcome to our program today. It is my honor to welcome you. We are expecting about 100, as John said, about 100 and something participants today, and including one of the good things about doing Zoom meetings and this type of presentations is that we can have people from all over the globe join us for this. We have some coming from all overseas. So it's 2 in the afternoon here, but I believe in Geneva, where some of our guests, UNCTAD is coming from, is probably around 7 in the morning. So good morning to them. We have a very interesting and timely program today. I mean, the Philippines Creative Industries Act, I think it's about time. I say timely because UNCTAD, one of our presenters today, actually has designated 2021 as the year of the creative industry for sustainable development. Very timely. There's been a lot of development in the Congress here in the Philippines on this act, and we'll hear more about that during the program. AmCham, as well as the JFC, the Joint Foreign Chambers, have been advocating for creative industries as one of the 7 big winners in our program since about 2010. And then 2018, we actually published a policy brief on it and held a special forum. I believe it was a very good forum at that time. And at that time, we reported there were about 915 million worth of exports in the creative industries being exported from the Philippines. 915 million. That's a lot. That was according to UNCTAD as well. Today, according to the Economic Council of the Philippines, I'm looking here and it shows that the numbers increased about 4 times, 4-fold. It's up now to about $4 billion in export of creative industry goods. So that's definitely growing interest in this topic. As AmCham, we've been very interested in it for several years now. And we see it as a growing sunrise, I should say, sunrise, or one of the new industries coming on board. And as such, I will take this opportunity to announce that AmCham Creativity Committee will be implemented. We'll start a new Creative Industries Committee. I've asked John Forbes to be the acting chair of that, John.
I accept.
You accept? He'll be our acting chair for this, and of course today he's our moderator. So I'm looking forward to the presentations today. This is really, really exciting program. And so let me call on to the screen our moderator for the day. Back to you, John Forbes.
All right, well, thank you, Eb. And you owe us some Starbucks coffee and some snacks. That is a great AmCham tradition when we get onto the new normal and back into the AmCham hall for these events. Let me also ask to give some welcoming remarks. Mr. Jeff Gobo, and we continue to welcome Jeff because he's a new arrival into the Philippines. We hope we'll be working with you during your tour at USAID, where you're the new chief of the Office of Economic Development and Governance. What's interesting to me about Jeff is that he's worked on 4 different continents before coming to Asia, since he joined USAID in 2003 following being a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, and also getting a master's in economic development at Duke University. But you've been in some exotic places, starting with Iraq, when things were pretty rough there, and Egypt. You may have witnessed the people power in Cairo during that particular period, and the South Sudan, which is a really challenged part of the center of Africa, and then in more recent, I miss Colombia, which at one point became the inspiration for several seasons of the drug war on Netflix. We're all at least familiar with that in Colombia. And finally, more recently, in another very challenging country, in Islamabad in Pakistan. So I guess you're going to be here for 4 years of R&R in the sunny tropical paradise of the Philippines. Welcome again, Jeff, and if you could share some welcoming remarks with our group today, please.
Thank you, John, and you're flattering me. I don't know if I'd call this quite a walk in the park. There's quite a bit of challenges here as well. Before I offer any remarks, and thank you for that introduction, when I sort of rack up where I've been, it's kind of an interesting palette of places and issues, but I do want to acknowledge some of our participants today, and first and foremost, Senator Aquilino Pimentel, who's joining us, Representative Christopher de Venecia, Undersecretary Rafaelita Aldaba from the Department of Trade and Industry. We have Director Thelma Manuel of the National Economic and Development Authority. There's also Ms. Marissa Henderson, who's joining us from Geneva, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. So good morning. Of course, thank you, Eb Hinchliffe, who's the Executive Director, opening us up today with the American Chamber. And of course, John, our Special Advisor and longtime face of AmCham for many of us. Mr. Aurelio Montenola, the President of Management Association of the Philippines. Mr. Paulo Mercado, the President and Founder of Creative Economy Council of the Philippines. And of course, Mr. Cesar Tolentino, the co-author of the 2018 policy brief on creative industries. And of course, not least, but I'd like to also acknowledge our many esteemed representatives of the European Chamber of Commerce who are joining us. Of course, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the IT and Business Processing Association of the Philippines, the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, and of course, the Animation Council of the Philippines. And we have a number of other representatives joining us from different embassies here in the Philippines, also the private sector, and many folks from different non-governmental partners. So a lot of folks on this important call today. So I just wanted to call out everybody that's here. Magandang hapon inyong lahat. And I'm definitely pleased to join you here this afternoon. For those who don't already know, I represent the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID as we're more commonly known. USAID is the lead US government agency for international development and humanitarian assistance around the world and here in the Philippines. And although I only have recently arrived in the Philippines about a couple months ago, I'm of course extremely pleased to have heard about and to speak with you today about this new endeavor with the private sector, and that will help boost the potential of the Philippine creative industry. USAID is committed to engaging with the private sector to create sustainable market-based solutions to address development challenges. We work closely with private sector entities on policy advocacy and to tap into their expertise, innovation, practices, and networks and market reach. So we consider our collaboration with partners such as the UP Public Administration Foundation, or often known here as the UPOF, and the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham. And these are important elements in advancing inclusive and resilient economic growth in the Philippines. So this collaboration is done primarily through our Regulatory Reform Support Program for National Development, or more commonly known as the RESPOND program. And this program seeks to improve regulatory quality here in the Philippines. U.S. government believes this to be an extremely important focus, given that a robust and fair regulatory regime will lead to enhanced competitiveness and efficiency, and ultimately will contribute to higher levels of investment and trade, inclusive growth, and self-reliance for the Philippines. So we're always looking ahead towards these larger goals, strategic goals. And we in USAID are really quite pleased to be partnering with AmCham and UPAF on a series of engagements that are focused on priority legislation that aims to relax foreign equity restrictions, enable increased competition in key sectors, and provide support to identified winner sectors, as we call them. So today in this forum, we'll discuss the bill to promote the development of the Creative Industries Act. This was recently filed both in the Philippine House of Representatives and in the Senate. Globally, there's growing recognition of the importance of the creative economy in driving overall economic growth. Creative industries earn over $2 trillion in revenue globally and provide more than 30 million direct jobs worldwide. So it's truly significant. And according to the 2018 World Economic Forum study that's titled The Future of Jobs, creativity will become one of the top 3 skill areas for job seekers, especially amid the increasing deployment of artificial intelligence and the emergence of what many are now calling the 4th Industrial Revolution. And the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, has designated 2021 as the year of creative economy for sustainable development. And so we're all looking forward to hearing from Dr. Marissa Henderson, who's here with us today from UNCTAD, as the Creative Economy Program Chief, who is joining us from Geneva. So thank you for being here. And so in a wave towards the Philippines, of course, Filipinos are certainly known internationally for world-class talent and creativity, and we shouldn't forget that. For example, the Philippines boasts of Arnel Pineda, who's now rocking it out with Journey. This is a group from my youth, and they're still with us. Kenneth Kabompu, Kabompoy, I'm mispronouncing names, who's the first Asian awarded as the Designer of the Year by the Maison et Objet in Paris for his furniture designs. And just last month, the Filipino team, Bren Esport, won the Mobile Legends World Championship in Singapore. And so in today's discussion, we will focus on how we can harness the inherent creativity of Filipinos to establish robust creative industries that have the potential to provide middle-class prosperity to a whole segment of the Philippine economy. And so here in the Philippines, as early as 2010, the creative industries was identified by the Joint Foreign Chambers as one of the country's 7 big winner sectors. These sectors, which were highlighted in the USAID-supported Arangkada Philippines 2010 publication, are targeted for development because of the high growth potential and the ability to attract high levels of investment and generate quality jobs. And so following the release of this publication, USAID continued to work with AmCham on other advocacy efforts, including the Arangkada Philippines Creative Industry Forum in 2018, which featured the release of Creative Industries Policy Brief, which was co-authored by one of our speakers today, Mr. Paulo Mercado. So we at USAID recognize and applaud the vision and efforts of our Philippine governmental partners to improve the environment for Filipinos to harness the economic and creative potential of this country. And the Creative Industries Act intends to further develop the Philippine creative economy by establishing the Philippine Creative Industry Development Council. This council is mandated to formulate and implement the Philippine Creative Industries Development Plan. The passage of this proposed legislation will be an extremely important component of our collective efforts to build back better and return economic growth to pre-pandemic levels. And so we're joined today by representatives of 2 chambers of Congress, Senator Coco Pimentel and Representative Toff de Vanessa. In addition to esteemed partners from the executive branch, we have Undersecretary Fita Aldaba and Director Thelma Manuel. I would also like to acknowledge private sector partners, including the Management Association of the Philippines, who's represented this afternoon by its president, Mr. Gigi Montanola. So as we look forward, I will encourage a productive discussion today with all of our distinguished experts on our panel. And I look forward to seeing the Philippines maximize its creative industry sector to further boost innovation, opportunity, and economic growth. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff, very much for that, those great welcoming remarks. We have a total of 6 speakers, and then we'll conclude with an open forum. And since this is a very special year for UNCTAD, and UNCTAD is providing assistance to developing countries such as the Philippines in creating jobs in new sectors, we are very honored to have with us today Dr. Marisa Henderson early in the morning in Geneva. I'm sure you have snow all over the place and it's cold. But you've been working with UNCTAD for the last 19 years after growing up in Argentina and working in Geneva and in London and getting degrees in Argentina and from the University of Warwick and working in the British Parliament and teaching at the university level, both in I guess in Buenos Aires and also in Londres, in London. So you've had a very interesting career, which included being the UNCTAD representative to the United Nations and in one of the world's most international cities and culturally diverse and creative, which is none other than New York. And what we're very interested in hearing from Dr. Henderson this morning is about the International Year of Creative Industries for Sustainable Development and what UNCTAD is doing and how that in particular will affect the Philippines. So thank you, Marisa Henderson, for joining us this morning or this afternoon.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines for inviting me to participate in this very important meeting. I would like to discuss the International Year of Creative Economy, why it's important, and what the role of creative economy is for the world economy and for developing countries. I will talk about COVID because it's very, very important. At the end, if you have any questions about the International Year of Creative Economy on the different events we're doing, I will be happy to answer questions later. So let me start by emphasizing the momentum generated by the United Nations Resolution on Creative Economy. The year 2021 is the United Nations International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. This is a hard-won landmark for the creative industries. It recognizes and elevates the creative economy as an important tool for building a sustainable, inclusive, and equitable future. When the resolution was being negotiated and approved, no one could have anticipated that the intervening year would hold a shattering worldwide pandemic. But perhaps what has felt like the end of the world is, in fact, the beginning of a new one. COVID-19 obliges us to think carefully about what makes for healthy and resilient communities at both the global level and the local level. The global health pandemic has brought about the deepest recession since the 1930s. Data for 2020 showed that the global output contracted more sharply than in the 2008 economic crisis, and in some cases registered the steepest drop on record. For developing countries like Philippines, this situation has increased the pre-crisis global inequalities and imbalances that are inherent in the global economy. In the case of creative industries, the crisis has worsened the sector's pre-existing vulnerabilities. Initially, the worst hit sectors were related to entertainment due to the lockdown measures. Live representations came practically to a halt in many countries all over the world. It started with the cancellations of events. As the crisis escalated, the situation evolved from empty concert halls to digital applications, which are indeed creative services. Some of the creative industries related to the digital economy thrived. Regrettably, not all creative economies have been able to overcome the complications that the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown restrictions bring. The cultural and creative sectors, along with the tourism sector, are particularly vulnerable to pandemics such as COVID, compared with other sectors of the economy. This is for various reasons, such as the nature of some of the activities, which are essentially public-facing, the size of the companies, which are in countries, developing countries, generally largely small and medium enterprises, the seasonality of some of the activities, many of which are summer dependent, and the nature of the services offered, some of which may be described as non-essential consumer spending. Fortunately, but also unfortunately, because of the effects of the pandemic on employment, the culture and creative industries are job-intensive sectors. With about 30 million jobs, culture and creative industries employ 1% of the world's active population. The creative economy also supports balanced city and regional development, as well as countries' international attractiveness as a touristic destination. Public and private investments in the culture and creative industries will therefore be particularly relevant in the fight against worldwide unemployment that we expect from COVID. There is a beacon of hope. And in the near future, in a world that is attempting to recover from a pandemic and its unprecedented impacts and uncertainty regarding economic growth lingers, but the long-term benefits of supporting culture and creative industries for a sustainable and inclusive recovery are many. They include, but are not limited to, an increase in quality of life, the stimulation of innovation, and thus a better adaptation to challenges and resilience. The performance and track record of the creative economy in the past 2 decades are indicative of its potential to achieve the benefits just mentioned. Estimates by EY, UNESCO, and WIPO put the contribution of creative industries to the global GDP between 3 and 5%. But therefore, there are varying degrees in both developed and developing countries. UNCTAD has been tracking trade in creative goods and services for close to 20 years. We find that growth in creative economy export trade has often outpaced the growth rate for other industries. In 2017, global creative goods global creative goods exports showed almost 5% increase from 2016. In preceding decades, exports in creative goods showed a steady upward trend, growing at yearly average of 3%. In 2017, creative goods accounted for about 4% of the world's merchandise trade, but opportunities are often unevenly distributed among countries. Let me finish by saying, more than ever, we need creative thinking, innovation, and problem solving to imagine ourselves out of the situation we are in with COVID. The creative industries, which are the lifeblood of the creative economy, are well placed to help. Before COVID hit, the world was in truth a good deal more fragile than many were willing to acknowledge. The global creative economy was growing fast in certain regions. The situation is fragile now, and not everybody can benefit. But for one thing, countries such as Philippines face many challenges exporting their creative economy outputs. For another, we need to do more to protect intellectual property. We also need to improve data collection and analysis for the industry and for policymakers like you, so they can make informed policy decisions based on data. 2021 gives us the chance to spotlight both the creative economy's value and its challenges. With a decade to go to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, now is the moment to clearly map out and demonstrate how culture and creativity fit into the Sustainable Development Agenda. The International Year of Creative Economy puts joint effort by governments, civil society, private sector, and international organizations in a new dimension. It allows us to highlight the importance of creative economy as part of the solution for the global recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henderson. Muchas gracias. Muy muchas gracias. I think we've been enlightened on a large global perspective. And if we can now shift to the more narrower local perspective with someone that we have been working with for many years, and we regard her as USEC creativity. In fact, if I were to give her a new name, and I speak of none other than Undersecretary Fita, Rafaelita, is the full name Aldaba, from the Board of Investments and the Department of Trade and Industry. It's been almost a decade that we've been working with you, USEC Fita, but even at TTI, but even before, you played a very prominent role as an academic and researcher and for a while vice president of the Philippine government economic think tank, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. And we are very grateful for your public service and many of the initiatives that you've taken in manufacturing, entrepreneurship, startup ecosystems, innovation, competitiveness, and other areas in government. And we were pleased when you joined us to advocate the e-vehicle and charging stations legislation, which I reiterate our commitment to push that through, we hope, in the Congress, in the current Congress before the end of this year. But we are delighted that you can speak today to us about the government perspective on how the creative industries sector can continue to grow in conjunction with this legislation and otherwise, because when we get this bill passed, I suspect you're going to have even more work since your boss, the Secretary of Trade and Industry, will chair the council and you'll be responsible for the planning and implementation among the government. That's a very large job. So welcome again, Fita Aldaba.
Thank you, John. Am I allowed to share?
Yes. Can we, Sarah? Is there any? What has to be done?
Can you allow me to share my screen,
Most certainly.
Sarah? Yeah, I'm still not allowed, Sarah.
We're checking. Hello, USEC. We're checking. We're going to make you a co-host so that you will be able to have access.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I have
Well,
to.
good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much, John, and to AmCham for giving me this opportunity. You know, it's always a great pleasure for me to share with you, with all of you, the work that we are doing. But for this afternoon, we will be focusing on the creative industry that DTI, together with its attached agencies, have been working on. Well, of course, apart from the programs, we have also commissioned PIDS through the support of USAID-RESPOND project to help us in crafting the definition and coverage of the Philippine creative industry, as well as to quantify the contribution of the various creative sectors to the economy. Let me check if I can already share. Okay, I think I can share now. All right. Can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So let me continue. And let me also thank Marisa for emphasizing the role of innovation and the need for data as we develop the creative economy here in the country. So this is what I'm going to do. I have three parts. So in part one, I would like to provide a brief overview of the creative industry in terms of the working definition and coverage, along with its economic contribution. The definition really and coverage is important in order to help us in quantifying its economic contribution. And then in part two, I will be presenting to you the potential opportunities and constraints and challenges confronting the industry. And then the last part would discuss the policies and programs of the DTI and its attached agencies. So as we all know, there is still no standard definition for the creative industry here in the Philippines. And countries have their own set of sectors representing the composition and coverage of their creative industry. But for the Philippines, creative industry has been used loosely. We do not have an official definition as to what the industry constitutes in terms of creative activities. So there are currently three existing international frameworks. We have the UNESCO, we have the WIPO, as well as the UNCTAD models. The UNESCO, as we know, focuses on cultural practices, activities, and resources that are needed to transform ideas into cultural goods and services. The WIPO concentrates on copyright, of course, so on creation, manufacture, production, broadcast, and distribution of works protected by copyright. Then we have the UNCTAD framework, which expands the concept of creativity by including activities having a strong artistic component to any economic activity producing symbolic products with heavy reliance on intellectual property and for as wide a market as possible. So UNCTAD would have a longer list as compared to WIPO or to the UNESCO. And then, so UNESCO has 6 cultural domains consisting of cultural and natural heritage, which would cover museums, archaeological and historical places, performance and celebration, along with audio, visual arts and crafts, books and press, interactive media, design and creative services, along with transversal domains. The WIPO would have 4 groups, and these are the core and then the non-core. The non-core would have 3 subgroups, and that would be partial copyright. So that would include apparel and textiles, footwear, jewelry, toys, and so on. The interdependent copyright would cover products like TV sets, computers, and musical instruments. And the non-dedicated support would include general, wholesale, retail, transportation, as well as information and communication. For the core, we have press and literature, we have music, theatrical productions, operas, motion picture, radio and TV, photography, software, databases, and computer games, along with visual and graphic arts, advertising, copyright collecting societies. For the UNCTAD, there are 4 groups. That's heritage, covering traditional, cultural, and cultural sites. For arts, you have visual and performing. Under media, you have publishing, audiovisual, and new media. And for the functional, this would cover design and creative services. Now, in terms of other countries, they have their own definitions, like Thailand, for example, would follow the UNCTAD model, defining 4 major groups and 15 subgroups within the economy. So it would have advertising, these are the priorities, architecture, broadcasting, crafts, design, fashion, and so on. Indonesia, meanwhile, its definition covers the following: advertising, application and game development, architecture, craft, culinary arts, fashion, film, animation and video, fine arts, and so on. And then you can also see on the slide the definition and scope of countries like the United Kingdom and Germany. But note, I'd like to cite as well Korea's case. In the case of Korea, they did not adopt a definition of the creative industries. And the government views the creative economy as an economy that generates new added value, jobs, and growth engines that prioritizes creativity. Okay, and note also that in other countries, they have their own dedicated agencies that are in charge of the development of the creative sector. Malaysia would have the Cultural Economy Development Agency. Thailand would have the Creative Economy Agency. Indonesia has Parekraf, while Korea has 2. That's the Center for Creative Economy and Innovation, as well as the Korea Creative Content Agency, or COCA. In the case of the Philippines, we still don't have this dedicated government agency. So based on the review that was carried out by PIDS, they are proposing the definition of the Philippine creative industry to focus on 3 frameworks. These are what you see on the slide, but primarily it would be based on the UNCTAD definition, covering 12 sectors, as you can see on the slide: traditional and cultural expressions, cultural sites, visual arts, performing arts, and so on. Apart from this, they are also proposing to add 2 other industries. So they made it an UNCTAD Plus, and that would include, apart from the base, culinary arts and creative services. There are also, the other suggestion is to include as well UNESCO cultural industries, covering tourism and sports. And based on the relevant industry standard codes, a total of 147 industries at the 4-digit level were identified as part of the creative sector. And this would represent 35% of the 419 codes that we currently have at the, these are at the 4-digit level. But in terms of the PSIC, that's the Philippine Standard Industry Classification, there would be 486 industries at the 5-digit level, and this would represent 38% of the total. So a huge coverage for the Philippine creative industry. Now, I would also want to share with you, in 2014, there was a study conducted by Francisco et al. And the IPOFIL, and they tried estimating the economic contribution of the industry using the framework developed by the WIPO. And as you can see on the slide, they are using the 2012 census data from the PSA, and the results showed that the creative industry contributed a total of 689 billion pesos, and this was roughly 6.5% of our GDP. In terms of employment, the industry generated a total of 744,791 in 2012, and this accounted for 18.5% of total employment. Now, the PIDS tried to update this study utilizing survey data. But as you can see on the slide, the estimates are actually not comparable because of the differences in the sources of data that are being used. As you can see, for the PIDS is using the 2016 survey data of the PSA, and based on this, total value added of the creative industries, based on the definition that I've earlier described, would only amount to 170,447,440. And this would constitute about 6% of the total value added in 2016. And in terms of employment, again, the previous estimates used another data set coming also from PSA, but this one makes use of the survey data, which would cover less number of establishments. So the total is only 390,553 workers, which would account for about 6% of total employment based on the 2016 annual survey of Philippine establishments. So really a huge difference because of the differences in the data sources. And that, again, would tell us the need really for us to be able to come up and with more updated data sets. But in terms of export performance, as you can see on the slide, we are, this is according to UNCTAD, the ranking that UNCTAD has made. We are #1 in creative services exports in ASEAN. We are #5 in terms of total services exports in ASEAN. And based on the 2020 Global Innovation Index, we ranked 10th in terms of creative goods exports. And let me also note that the bulk of our creative trade is due to the strong performance of our creative services sector. And primarily this is coming from the IT and computer services sector. Creative output is also a sub-pillar in the Global Innovation Index. And in 2020, we ranked 57th in terms of creative outputs. And in terms of creative exports, as percentage of total trade, the Philippines ranked 10th. Okay. Now, at a time when our creative industries have been gaining growth momentum, the pandemic hit us, and as a result, the creative sectors have been badly affected. Movie theaters were not allowed to operate, while live events, cultural festivals were prohibited. And though the animation and game development sectors were operating through alternative work arrangements, they suffered productivity and revenue losses due to canceled contracts. And according to CECP, the industry would suffer up to 90% revenue losses due to the health crisis that has turned into an economic crisis. And according to the I Lost My Gig.ph website, a total of 5,549 projects were lost, affecting 4,458 people, and income losses amounting to 268 million pesos. But one silver lining is the crisis has actually accelerated the rapid digitalization of the economy, and this reinforced trends opened new opportunities for our creative industries. With the new technologies, barriers to entry have been reduced, and also these new technologies provided cross-border opportunities along with improved user experience, providing consumers with increased and wider choice, convenience, and affordability, and thereby improving overall user experience. So with these new developments, higher value is generated by combining our technological expertise and creativity. For instance, EdTech is projected to grow at a compounded annual growth of 16% post-COVID. And for the Philippine gaming and animation industry, the forecast is it's going to reach 124 million US dollars in terms of value. Video content watched globally during the pandemic increased by 60%. And meanwhile, virtual reality and augmented reality are expected to reach a value of 95 billion US dollars. So with all these new opportunities, we should be able to harness the strengths of our industry, such as the IT BPM sector, which could move into creatives like software and game development, EdTech, VidTech, in order to capture the demand being created by the paradigm shift in the new normal. But to be able to maximize these opportunities, we need to address the most binding constraints affecting the growth and development of the industry. And these constraints would include, as you can see on the slide, high cost of production and market entry, especially in gaming and film, the current fragmented approach to creative skills development and education, lack of sectoral collaboration, structure and governance, lack of data on the industry to guide policymaking, along with information that would be given to investors, low level of investment and investor readiness, an underdeveloped local market, and bias in imported content, goods, and services, as well as low levels of clustering and low market awareness. So the creative industry is an important priority sector of the DTI. And to capture these opportunities, our strategy focuses on supporting the creative industries to enable them to digitalize their processes, innovate, and constantly discover, integrate, and scale technologies to take advantage of the changing consumption patterns and globalize to ensure that our creative goods and services will penetrate the global market. And our programs are geared mainly towards providing both fiscal and non-fiscal support for industry development. And of course, equally important is trade and investment promotion. The creative industry, as we know, I'm sure you will all agree with me, is going to play a significant role in spurring innovation and knowledge transfer across all sectors, as well as in fostering inclusive and sustainable development. In this slide, I'm sharing with you the BOI Investment Priorities Plan, which has identified many creative industries and knowledge-based services that would be incentivized. So you have there creative and IT services, animation, software development, game development, engineering design, digital and tech startups, along with skills training programs related to people, process, tools, and technology. Well, in terms of incentives, BOI is providing income tax holiday, duty exemption on imported capital equipment, spare parts and accessories, along with employment of foreign nationals and simplification of customs procedures. Well, under the CREATE Act, a menu of incentives is provided, and this would consist of income tax holiday from 4 to 7 years. There's also a 5% special corporate income tax, along with enhanced deductions. And this would allow companies to deduct additional expenses. There's a depreciation allowance that is allowed, labor expenses, R&D, training expenses, and so on. So for our next steps, especially as we celebrate the International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. We are definitely committed to formulating and implementing the creative industry roadmaps in order to support the development of an innovative and globally competitive creative industry by adapting and integrating new technologies with our industries and our culture, and being able to produce our own creative products and services. And to prepare and take advantage of all these opportunities, we need to work together and strengthen collaboration as we gear our industries to digitalize, to innovate, and globalize. Three important things that I would also want to share. Number one, we are jumpstarting the creation of the Philippine Creative Industry Roadmap together with its action plan. And this is going to define our strategic priorities and concrete action plan for the development of the industry. We are also working together with the Philippine Statistics Authority in order to enable us to come up with the necessary data along with the necessary codes so as to enable us to monitor all these creative statistics on a regular basis. And according to PSA, they would be creating a creative industry satellite account to properly and more accurately measure the contribution of the industry. And of course, number three, we continue to support the Philippine Creative Industries Act and the bill, of course. And this is important in order to enable us to come up with a more institutionalized framework, and hopefully we'll have our own dedicated authority or agency in charge of developing the creative industry. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Back to you, John.
Salamat po, Yusek Fita. You've done it again. You explode our mind with so much data and organized presentation. It's really quite exciting to see how this has grown from an early embryonic stage not so long ago at DTI to being really on the cusp of hopefully being a very important part of the economic recovery in the next few years. So thank you very much, and I hope you can stay until the open forum, because we have 30 minutes for that at the conclusion of all of the presentations. Our next presentation will come from NEDA, from Dr. Thelma Manuel, who will try to put this in the context of AmBisyon Natin, how it fits into the future vision in 2040 of the Philippine economy. Dr. Manuel heads the governance staff of NEDA, and in that conjunction has a broad portfolio, but in particular, she focuses on public sector governance, but including administration of justice, Philippine culture and values, and national competition policy. And she has dedicated 30 years of her professional life to development work, mostly in NEDA. Among her areas of interest include regional and local development, public sector governance, capacity building, and institutional development. Her Master's of Arts is in local and regional development at the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. And prior to that, as an undergraduate, she had a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology at UP Diliman. So with that, I would like to turn over the floor to Director Thelma Manuel of National Economic and Development Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Forbes. Hi and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I'd like to correct that I am not a doctor, just a director. I did not get around to pursuing a PhD. But anyway, let me first congratulate the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines for being able to organize this special reform legislation discussion series webinar focusing on the creative industries bill. A lot has been said about the new normal, forcing us to rethink about existing paradigms in policy and development. Among this is the emphasis on adopting a whole of government and whole of society approach to post-pandemic resiliency and recovery. Last February 4, NEDA launched the updated Philippine Development Plan 2017-2022, or what we popularly call as the PDP. The current PDP, as perhaps many of you know, is the first plan to have a distinct chapter devoted to promoting Philippine culture and values in recognition of the role of culture in development. In light of the new normal arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, the updated PDP promotes Philippine culture and creativity as a tool for social cohesion and pushes for building a creative economy towards a healthy, resilient Philippines. Okay, so what are the key messages of this presentation? First, our country's long-term vision or AmBisyon Natin 2040 remains the same, and the creative industry is an important contributor to its attainment. Second, efforts are initiated for the creative industry, both by government and the private sector, but policies and plans must be consolidated and coordinating mechanisms established to ensure a whole-of-country approach to develop and promote the creative industries. Now, what then is AmBisyon Natin 2040? I know a number of you have heard about AmBisyon Natin 2040 since NED has been talking about this since as early as 2016. The name is actually a play of words, the vision and ambition. This is a 25-year vision for Filipinos and the Philippines. It articulates the kind of life that Filipinos want to live in the next 25 years and how we would like to see the country in 2040. Following a series of focus group discussions and survey conducted in 2015-2016, this long-term vision was adopted and articulated as follows. By 2040, the Philippines shall be a prosperous, predominantly middle-class society where no one is poor. Our peoples shall live long and healthy lives, be smart and innovative, and shall live in a high-trust society. Now, to realize this vision, all sectors of society, whether public or private, should direct efforts towards creating opportunities for Filipinos. Government, in particular, must use its tools of fiscal, monetary, and regulatory policies to steer the development path towards enabling Filipinos to attain their ambition. This pertains to all dimensions of development: economic, human and physical capital, institutional, social, and cultural. Okay. To attain a prosperous, predominantly middle-class society where no one is poor, economic growth must be relevant, inclusive, and sustainable. More than the increase in income, economic growth must progressively improve the quality of life of the majority of the Filipinos. To do this, we need to have a competitive enterprises, especially in sectors that will have direct contribution to realizing the long-term vision. These are in housing and urban development, manufacturing, connective infrastructure, and this would include transportation and communications technology, agriculture, tourism and allied services, financial, education, health, and wellness services. These sectors are important considering that people want to be free from hunger, poverty, and financial worries. They want their own houses in livable cities. They want to be mobile. They want to run their own businesses. They want quick and clean transactions with government and even with the private sector. Creative goods and services, which make up what we know as a creative industry, are integrated within these sectors, and we acknowledge that their collective contribution cannot be underestimated. Hence, the Philippine Development Plan, in the Philippine Development Plan, the creative industry is especially supported in terms of development strategies. Looking back, Executive Order number 5, which was issued in 2016, approved and adopted the 25-year long-term vision entitled AmBisyon Natin 2040 as guide for development planning. It represents collective aspirations of Filipinos to enjoy a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay. The PDP 2017-2022 is the first medium-term plan geared towards the long-term vision. And this was formulated to lay down the foundation for inclusive growth, a high trust and resilient society, and a globally competitive knowledge economy. This foundation is intended to be strong enough for the next 3 development plans to build on. So this is a great challenge for us under this administration. However, recent developments have shown that social and economic gains can easily be eroded or even reversed. This is so true as we are currently experiencing now under the COVID-19 pandemic. Hence, together with economic recovery, building resilience is now the urgent and important development objective. Now, being resilient, after all, is an essential component of the ambition, having a secure future or panatag na buhay. Okay, so go back. Back. Sorry. Yeah, I think this is it. Okay, so next slide, please. We in NEDA always want to remind ourselves that with our achievements in the past few years, the Philippines was actually poised to become an upper middle income country were it not for the COVID-19 pandemic. Like other countries in the world, we were struck by the once-in-a-century global pandemic. As a result, our immediate response was to save lives by first restricting social and economic activities to limit the spread of the virus while improving the country's health system capacity. In March last year, the IATF Technical Working Group for Anticipatory and Forward Planning was created to provide recommendations on rebuilding confidence and adjusting to the new normal, while in constant consultation not only with the various government agencies, but with the private sector and the general public. These inputs were processed to come up with a characterization of the new normal, along with initial recommendations published in the We Recover as One report, or what we would call as the WIRAO report. No? In general, the new normal means that the COVID-19 threat will be foremost in the mind of individuals. Physical distancing constantly observed and face covering required. No? Strict hygiene and sanitation protocols will continue to be practiced, and sporadic lockdowns will remain possible. No? So we have to be very realistic about this as the pandemic is still ongoing. Okay, so next slide, please. It is important to keep in mind that even with the emergence of new threats, our commitment to the collective vision remains. Our long-term vision, AmBisyon Natin 2040, remains the same and has even become more pronounced now. Therefore, we should not lose sight of this vision of a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay, or strongly rooted, comfortable, and secure life for all. The challenge at hand is to master, as quick as possible, an economic turnaround while managing the risks and transitioning into a new and better normal to enable and empower every Filipino to achieve his or her ambition. Okay, so next slide, please. The PDP 2017 to 2022 strategic framework was updated to align it with the imperatives for recovery and the new and better normal within the overall goal of a healthy and resilient Philippines. We have maintained the overall original structure of the strategic framework, but we have tweaked some strategies to emphasize building the resilience of the country. So in this plan, culture and creativity contributes largely to the malasakit pillar. On this screen, these are the boxes in yellow. No? These are for enhancing the social fabric toward a high trust society. Culture also contributes to the other pillars to the extent that it refers to, one, attitudes and behaviors that will help people take advantage of economic opportunities for pagbabago or inequality reducing transformation, and two, to innovate and adapt technology under the pillar of patuloy na pag-unlad or increasing the growth potential. Okay. Next slide, please. In the process of updating the PDP, these were our assessments. No? The inclusion of a standalone chapter on Philippine culture in the PDP 2017-2022 allowed for more discussions on culture and values and heightened awareness on the need to integrate culture in the country's socio-economic development. In 2017 and 2019, Baguio City and Cebu City became the first UNESCO creative cities of the Philippines under the crafts and folk arts category and design category respectively. This could serve as potential model for cities across the country on how they can develop their local creative economies. However, the unprecedented scale of the pandemic has exposed major policy gaps in the existing governance framework for cultural development and appreciation for diverse cultural expressions. We face further challenges in the transition into the new normal, since creative and cultural workers and enterprises are among the hardest hit sectors during the community quarantine periods. Okay. In terms of challenges, cultural and creative enterprises and workers, especially freelancers in the gig economy, remain vulnerable. Creative and cultural workers and enterprises include the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector, along with allied sectors such as tourism and sports and fitness. As earlier mentioned by UNCTAD, these were among the hardest hit due to the closure of businesses during the community quarantine periods. Based on the MSME surveys conducted by DOF, firms in these sectors faced closure of up to 9 months last year, in 2020. Second, there is difficulty to measure the exact size and contribution of the Philippine creative economy to the GDP. Hence, there is a need to review existing methodologies and to conduct data inventory and mapping to produce the necessary indicators for culture and the creative economy for evidence-based planning, policymaking, and programming. I note that there are now initiatives to measure the size and the contribution of the creative industries to GDP, as was earlier presented by UNCTAD as well. Third, there is a need to strengthen existing governance structures and mechanisms for the culture and the arts as a whole, including the creative sector. In the PDP 2017-2022, the WIPO, Global Innovation Index, Creative Outputs Sub-Index, is used as proxy indicator to monitor the performance of Philippine creativity. We are targeting an increasing year-on-year performance. In 2020, the Philippines continues to remain within the top 50% globally in terms of the creative outputs. In particular, the country improved its ranking from 63rd out of 129 countries in 2019 to 57th out of 131 countries this year. This is the second year in a row that the Philippines is in the upper half globally. So this is quite good news for us. But despite the decline in creative goods exports as share of total trade, this is 6.1% in 2020 from 7% in 2019. Creative goods exports remain to be a strength of the Philippines, ranking 10th overall in comparison. In comparison, the average share of creative goods exports across the ASEAN is at 4.1%. We note, though, that while the Philippines may leverage on creative goods exports as a strength, we continue to face stiff competition among our ASEAN neighbors. In the interest of time, I will go straight to specific PDP strategies related to the creative economy and creative industries. Chapter 7 of the PDP is on promoting Philippine culture and values towards bayanihan, or civic unity and cooperation. Now, under this chapter, pagkamalikhain or advancing the value of creative excellence is one of the desired outcomes. This recognizes that creative works inspire bayanihan in times of crisis. However, the pandemic has revealed more vulnerabilities of cultural and creative industries and workers who are the creators of this work. There has also been greater reliance on digital and virtual collaboration and production as more and more people use online platforms to share, distribute, and consume creative products and works. The first strategy here emphasizes a resilient and inclusive Philippine creative economy, which not only supports the resilience of cultural and creative industries, but also addresses the vulnerabilities of creative and cultural workers in the gig economy through capacity building, for business continuity planning, income support systems, etc. This includes the current initiative to formulate the Philippine Creative Economy Roadmap, which, as I understand it, will come up with baseline data on the country's creative industries, particularly the specific industry and sub-industry classifications that should be disaggregated. It also includes the continuation of culture and arts-related education at different levels, basic, tertiary, and tech-book, under the new normal. The second strategy emphasizes the need to maximize the use of digital and online platforms, creativity for social impact, and promoting artistic, scientific, technological collaboration to inspire bayanihan. The Philippine creative economy can likewise benefit from other cross-cutting strategies by the government as encapsulated in other chapters of the PDP. Under Chapter 9, on expanding economic opportunities, creative industries, along with allied industries such as furniture and garments, tourism, IT/BPM, are identified as priority sectors that are expected to increase the country's competitiveness amid global market uncertainties. This includes strengthening the implementation of the Philippine Inclusive Innovation Industrial Strategies, which includes creative industries as a priority sector along with allied industries. Creativity and innovation are closely related to each other. So Chapter 14 of the PDP on vigorously advancing science, technology, and innovation identifies strategies to develop a vibrant intellectual property rights culture and to foster an STI culture across disciplines. There are also other government initiatives that support the creative industries. So I think Yusek Fita also mentioned this earlier, the Investment Priorities Plan 2017 to 2022. Then there's the Philippine Inclusive Innovation Industrial Strategy, which prioritizes the growth and development of creative industry as one of the 15 major industries identified to benefit from closer integration of agriculture, industry, and services from the adoption of innovative applications. Then, of course, skills development. As of September 2019, TESDA has been offering training for creative industry occupations with associated training regulations, such as on animation, web development, programming, game programming, visual graphic design, performing arts, photography, and illustration, among others. I understand that some of these programs are also being continued up until now. I guess this ends my presentation. That was my last slide. Thank you very much for this opportunity given to NEDA to be able to present AmBisyon Natin 2040. Good afternoon, everyone.
So let me come back and thank Director Thelma. I'm really delighted that this is increasingly part of the PDP. And I hope the legislative parts of this may still be accomplished in the remaining months of the 18th Congress. And that leads us into our next speaker. And as we go, please put questions that you have into the chat so that we'll have time. We'll have plenty of questions when we get to the open forum. Our next speaker is a friend and an impressive leader from the private sector, Paulo Mercado, who is the president and founder of the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines. Paulo is a longtime international advertising and marketing veteran. He spent the last 12 years of his career with Nestle Philippines as the chief marketing officer, as well as for the Nestle Greater China region, which geographically and in terms of population and Nestle consumers is a much greater area. So that's probably one of the largest regions for Nestle in the entire world. Prior to these assignments, Paulo was involved with Nestle headquarters in Switzerland for a number of years. And before Nestle, he was in advertising for a decade or more, including with Publicis Group in Paris, and COO and managing director then of the Publicis Group in Manila, which in fact he founded in 2003. And Paulo is the first Filipino graduate of the Berlin School of Creative Leadership MBA program. So I suspect Paulo speaks French and Tagalog and German, as well as English, and perhaps now he's learning Igorot up in Baguio, where he's currently residing. So Paulo, I'm going to turn over the screen to you. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much. No German for now, but a little French, which is quite rusty. May I ask Sarah, please, to share the screen? Yep. Okay. So thank you very much. I'm going to talk really about the creative industries. Much of the statistics and data on available has already been shared by USAID-FITA. So I'll spend more time on disruption and the recovery and rebound steps needed, which is why this new legislation is quite timely. Next slide, please. So Philippine creative economy pre-COVID crisis levels. First of all, when we're talking about the Philippine creative industries, next slide, please. The scoping of this is I'm following more or less the mapping framework of UNCTAD, which has already been discussed before. There are many different mapping methodologies, but this is the one that is actually being used as the framework for the Philippine Creative Industries Act, with the addition primarily of gastronomy into this picture, and also expanding a little bit on creative services. Now, in terms of the state of creative industries in terms of value, and again, some of this data is repetitive, so I will go very quickly. So in the next slide, please. So USAID-FITA already talked about this, which is based on the IPO Phil analysis on the Census of Philippine Business and Industry. The collective value of creative industries was about 6.5% of GDP. Now, what was also impressive in that same report was that from 1999 to 2010, based on the annual survey for Philippine Business and Industry, the growth rate of these copyright-based industries was an astounding 12.7%. So much, much faster than the growth rate of the Philippine economy at that time. Note also that this total value does not include heritage and gastronomy. Now, before people think that, oh, these are minor sectors, in fact, in the creative economy accounting of Indonesia, gastronomy is by far their biggest sector, close to 40% of the Indonesian creative economy statistics. And then in Thailand, also heritage, because they link it to tourism statistics, and gastronomy are the two biggest sectors as well. So these are two major sectors that need to be included in a more comprehensive creative economy statistics. Now, what I did for lack of, let's say, a latest estimate is that I simply made a projection of what if the creative industries retain 6.5% share of the 2019 GDP. And that's already a very conservative estimate given its very fast growth rate previously. And it could be as big as 1.27 trillion pesos, which is roughly the size of the BPO industry. So it can be quite big, but unfortunately we don't have a reliable and updated accounting pre-COVID. On the next slide, are the employment estimates, and this is a bit more rough. So again, in the same source data, there were about 750,000 jobs. It's about 18.5% of the CPBI sample, CPBI universe. But the key point here is that that survey only covered businesses larger than 20 employees. And as a lot of creative industries are under 20 employees, the SMEs are not really accounted for. Furthermore, creative industries rely on a very large number of contractual, project-based contractors or freelancers. So for example, if you are doing a movie, for every one full-time person on the movie set, there could be as many as 4 or 5 more freelancers who are working on the same project, but just for that project. So industry leaders guesstimate that there could be as many as 2 times to 4 times the number of creative freelancers for every formal sector full-time employee. Now, I would also count another group because that's different from the ones who support the domestic creative industries. And this group are the online freelance workers. So they're very similar to BPO workers, except that they're not working for a BPO company. They're doing this, they're freelancing on their own and servicing clients abroad on freelance platforms such as Upwork, Behance, etc. And based on some studies done in 2018 by PayPal and Upwork, there are between 1.2 to 1.5 million online freelancers registered on their platforms. Now, majority of these, so not all of them do creative work, but the majority of them do. I've seen a study from Payoneer that puts that estimate at about 65% of these 1.2 to 1.5 million online freelancers are in fact doing creative work primarily. And while this is good, there is an upside opportunity for increasing the value of online freelancing work, because in the Philippines, the average pay per hour of an online freelancer is only $11 per hour as compared to the global average of $22 per hour. So we're really right in the mid-range of this one. And then finally, in terms of the status of, next slide, please. In terms of the status of exports and outsourcing. So this data has been presented, but I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail on the ranking and splitting creative goods from creative services. And really, the Philippines lags way behind still on creative goods export based on the 2018 UNCTAD report, where we are less than a tenth of what Singapore does and less than 6 times that of Malaysia, Thailand, and even Indonesia. Largely, that's because a lot of our creative goods are predominantly handcrafted goods and that are very difficult to scale. Plus, the Philippines has prohibitive logistics costs that hinder our price competitiveness in these markets. However, the bright spot in that report is that we are actually ahead without even trying that hard. We are actually ahead in terms of creative services. Now, there's some difficulty in really creating a standard accounting for creative services, but at least for this report, it was surprising that we were #1 without really even being conscious of developing creative services as a priority sector. This is driven largely by software and IT, but also you have animation, game development, digital marketing, and design services also contributing to that. And this doesn't count the, let's say, the freelancing sector that I had already mentioned, where there is no estimate yet of how much do these creative freelancers based in the Philippines bring into the Philippine economy. So next slide, please. So definitely the COVID-19 pandemic has severely disrupted creative industries. Initially, in the first part of the lockdowns, everybody was in pain. So next slide, please. So everybody was in pain, and because it was so hard to get any reliable statistics on previous year versus last year income, through consultation and through the different forums, you could tell that some of them were severely affected, meaning zero revenue and no real immediate prospects of the revenue coming back. While some of them were lamenting a 25% loss or 30% loss in revenue versus previous year, but that still meant that they were earning about 70% of previous year's revenue, and they were fine. And there were some job losses, but not as severe as others. So everybody experienced pain, but in different ways. And in the next slide, what I tried to do in the next slide is sort of give a one chart summary of the experience in the Philippines, more or less. You know, nobody is really painless, even those in the lower left-hand corner. So those involved in digital creative services and digital content experienced some pain, but they were better off than the rest. The pain that they experienced wasn't so much in demand, but in their ability to supply. I still remember the anecdotes from the Animation Council that they still had the clients, they still had the contracts, but the difficulty was when they transitioned to work from home, bandwidth of their animators at home wasn't enough to meet the timing demands of getting the product on time to the client. And that led to loss of some contracts for them. So there were still some operational issues, and really the collective, let's say, pain point of the group in this sector is better connectivity, more affordable connectivity, especially for a remote and decentralized workforce, which is more difficult because if they're not in an office setup. In the middle ground, and I would say the exception here would be broadcast media. In fact, broadcast media, TV and radio, from a viewership and listenership point of view, enjoyed a pretty measurable increase during the pandemic. However, and again, this is not so much the pandemic itself, but for other circumstances, we have to remember that almost 50% of the TV and radio supply was removed from the market in May. And that has impacted not just that one company, ABS-CBN, but it has impacted the total advertising pie as a whole. So both broadcast media and advertising were affected for reasons also extraneous to the pandemic. Others, books, press, lifestyle, etc. Of course, when you talk to them, they feel that they're much more in crisis than, for example, the ones on the right-hand side. But in truth, there is still demand for books and textbooks. For lifestyle design, it is depleted, but the demand is still there. And even architecture, whereas big projects or big commercial spaces may have been delayed, there is still a push for infrastructure to continue, for people redesigning their homes for work from home. But I think it's more of the commercial real estate that is quite affected. In the last sectors on the right, this is the one where even today they are still suffering. So Marisa had mentioned this earlier, those involved in face-to-face large public audiences who are dependent on that, like performing arts, festivals and celebrations, cinema houses, which today is being debated of when can these open. And then you also have the folk and craft sector, which are highly dependent on tourism, visual arts because it's seen as an expendable, a non-priority expenditure. Some of them, it's more of an acceleration of a decline that has been happening. Newspapers and magazines, the physical print, had already been in decline because of the rise of digital media. And it seems that the that the pandemic only accelerated, people not wanting to go out to buy newspapers still. So, and then you have museum and heritage sites. So like crafts and folk arts, very tourism dependent. So these ones are really, the disruption is quite different. And because of this, the roadmaps, if you come to the next slide, please, the roadmaps necessary are quite different for each one. And this has to be considered. It's for creative industries to rebound and return to growth. There are different there are different roadmaps that need to be built. So for those on, let's say, the green box, the trick here is that how do they take advantage of the new growth opportunities, especially in digital fields that have arisen? How can we accelerate that? How can they hockey stick their recovery such that they even exceed their previous value and employment numbers? For the ones in the middle, it's really more adapting to business operations to meet, to improve their delivery and meet the demand that is still there, how to improve it. But it's more about operational tweak. It's the last sector that is most challenged, because for this one, and it's still, let's say, for example, I'll take the most extreme example of performing arts. Even if there were a permission given for live events to happen, would the market be ready for it? So here, it's so redefining the value proposition is quite key, because if you, for example, take a play and you put it on digital, while a lot of people will watch, will they pay the same value for it? And that's the challenge now that many of these sectors are facing. It's not just a question of simply going into digital. They have to redefine their total value proposition, find alternative markets and customers, and probably even pivot business models and revenue sources. So as a last couple of slides, so the next slide, please. We're quite, I'm very pleased to be part of the working group and really hearing all of the feedback as well on the proposed Creative Industries Bill. And I would say that there are a few things that are quite important about this proposed bill. One is actually, it helps galvanize the creative industries to act as one. Because a lot of them have really been, most of them have really been working in silos in terms of their respective industry sector. And it's only recently that they're appreciating now that they're part of a bigger creative nation. And in doing so, really voice that they are an important sector and must be given the chance not only to survive, but to also to help the economy as a whole. Some of these are the key features of this bill. It sets the groundwork for finally having some official definition and establishing regular mapping and measurement of the Philippine creative industries and creative economy. USAID-RESPOND already mentioned this. Essential, or at the core of it, is the development of a national creative industries plan. So similar to what Neda had shown, but really much more, how does the industry recover and how does it grow in the next 3, 5, 10 years? And then establishes the Creative Industry Leadership Council, composed of a balance between ex officio members, either secretary or undersecretary level, and then 9 creative industry leaders from the 9 domains that are spelled out in the bill. It establishes, beyond the council, which meets only about quarterly and discusses policies and programs, there will be a national secretariat, so a permanent secretariat that will be established to ensure execution of the plans and programs that have been agreed. And finally, the consolidation of the incentives, financing instruments. There's a proposed industry trust fund, a voucher system for training and education, a program for digital acceleration, and the development of creative zones. So these will be part of the National Creative Industries Development Plan. So I will just end with something I learned from China, which I think is relevant at this stage. So next slide, please. I really believe in this concept of Weixin, so the Chinese word for crisis. and what I've been told or was made to understand that it's a combination of two characters. One is on danger and the other one is on opportunity. And for me, I think this is really how we should see this COVID-19 pandemic, because I still take inspiration from the fact that the Korean creative and content industries, the inception of that was made in the middle of the 1997 Asian financial crisis, when they saw it's not just about getting back to the old normal, it's about building a new future. And I think the Philippines has a chance to do that now. And that's why I really strongly believe that this Creative Industries Act is perfect timing for this to happen now. So thank you very much. And thank you again, John, for inviting me.
Well, walang naman, Paulo. I think that's really great. As always, your slides are to the point and inspiring. And I hope that that will actually happen, that this crisis will be the opportunity that is seized, and we'll look back on it 5 years ago as a seminal point in time. We have now come to the point where we're turning to our Congress and to the two key actors in the House and Senate who are going to be shepherding the legislation, and we'll learn more about the legislation through the rest of the 18th Congress. And I would again encourage people to type in their questions into the chat box. We're getting one or two already. So let me next turn to the what's called the lower house out in the Batasan Pambansa, and to the chairman of a special House Committee on Creative Industry and the Performing Arts, who himself is a actor, thespian, who has turned to politics in his family's tradition, Representative Christopher de Venecia from the 4th District of Pangasinan, which includes the city of Dagupan. Toff de Venecia is a Ateneo graduate, and he spent some time at the Harvard Kennedy School, which I hope he used to go to all the plays that are available in Boston, and himself have a background not just in working for some of the local theater companies here, but also in another creative industry, which is journalism. And he's been an editor with the Philippine Star. Presently, in addition to representing his district in the Congress, he's a deputy majority leader and has become very prominent, I think, in chairing this particular committee, which has 52 members that has been handling this legislation. And it's significant that he's recruited into this 11 deputy speakers and 14 committee chairs. I'll be interested to hear from him how he put that special committee together. And it's been working at a breakneck pace in order to get the bill moving out into the plenary. So welcome, Kong Toff. Are you with us today? We have your slide up here. And please don't forget to say hello to your mother, Gina, when you see her next time. That's where we briefly met at a birthday party with your mother, you may recall, at Hoshinglo Restaurant, I think last year. So welcome to AmCham.
Thank you for having me, John, and to all the members of AmCham and to my fellow panelists. Good afternoon. Sorry I logged in late. I actually had to leave a technical working group that I was part of on one of our measures in the committee, and I'll be jumping into that after this. But I'd like to start by just saying how overwhelmed we are by the support that the American Chamber of Commerce through the Joint Foreign Chambers has given us in pushing for the swift passage of this proposed Philippine Creative Industries Development Act, as earlier alluded to by our partner and advisor, Paolo Mercado. So AmCham is a 100-year-old organization. It's one of the pillars of our country's development. So it goes without saying that your support really gives credence to all of our efforts. So thank you so much. We're so grateful to know that we have the backing of one of the most reputable organizations in the country. And I thus feel privileged, if not duty bound, to provide you with these updates about the status of this legislative measure, as well as to give context within which similar measures for the creative economy are being pushed, to also give you and I an idea of the prospect of this bill being passed during this Congress. So this time last week, February 11, the Special Committee on Creative Industry and Performing Arts of the 18th Congress approved the current draft of the proposed Philippine Creative Industries Development Bill. Deliberations for this measure commenced in December, which were followed by 3 rigorous technical working group meetings that lasted for hours, leading up to where we are now. But I have to say that even before the bill was tackled in the committee and transmitted into a technical working group, we've had about 5 to 6 months of weekly consultations with the creative economy sectors. It started in the height of the pandemic, coming to the call of our creative freelancers for inclusion in Bayanihan 2, or the stimulus bill that was passed last year, and realizing that, like what Paolo said, there is a bigger world out there outside of our own creative silos that we didn't necessarily know about. And so the bill and the work that we've done on it seems to be a culmination of the months of hard work that we've been doing in our, not even a committee yet during that time, but a block, which is called the Arts and Culture and Creative Industries Block. I'll talk about that later. These 3 TWG meetings were not only backbreaking, sometimes they became heated and impassioned as we, authors of the bill, held our breath and listened. As confident as we were when we first drafted these measures, many realities arose during the meetings that challenged our preconceived understanding and perspectives of these industries. Though the process was difficult, the result was something that we can all be truly proud of in the end. I can confidently say that the current version of the measure is truly a stakeholders' bill, one that reflects the true needs of the creative industries. Now that we have the creative stakeholders buy-in, it is important for us to know that we have the business sector backing us as well. And to excite you even more, allow me now to present before you the bigger picture behind all of these efforts. Like I said, we have to start with ACHIEVE, or the Arts and Culture and Creative Industries Block. We started out with a modest 15 members of the lower house. There was no selection criteria other than who I personally knew were passionate about arts and culture, especially those who had some kind of experience working in the sector, mostly film actors and lifestyle advocates. But now the block has grown to include 55 members coming from various political parties, backgrounds, and even generations. So as you may now realize, I really am one of the younger members of the lower house. So it thrills me that our block continues to be graced by the more experienced leaders in the legislative branch. Having our numbers swell to 55 means that we have champions whose expertise and passion we can rely on to support any effort for the creative economy. And it's not that complicated, actually. We simply maintain a Viber group where we constantly, almost on a daily basis, share news and updates about the creative industries, whether it's legislative in nature or about the trending news of the day, such as when we all got excited over the Voltes 5 trailer and more excited by the fact that Filipino artists are going to be behind it. Or that the film Tagpuan, which is produced by one of our members in ACHIEVE, Congressman Alfred Vargas, won Best Film at the Chowri Chowra International Film Festival in India. ACHIEVE has become an environment where we policymakers are able to constantly remind ourselves of the omnipresence of arts and the creative industries in our lives, which has helped us stay excited and enthusiastic about pursuing reforms for their development and growth prospects. This new culture of creativity that we have developed, I believe, has led to a change of mindset that the industry has so long needed. But apart from its sheer number, Achiev's membership also has a strategic component to it. First, we have members who themselves are stakeholders in the creative economy. So, Mr. Forbes mentioned earlier that I am a former theater director, theater producer, still am, but maybe not for the time being while this pandemic is still raging. And I was a former lifestyle editor for Chalk Magazine, as well as for the Philippine Stars Young Star section. But then we also have Congresswoman Nika Ko, who is an interior designer herself. We have actors like Congressman Alfred Vargas and Dan Fernandez and Congressman Yul Servonieto, who is presently presiding over the technical working group on the Film Philippines bill. Of course, you have Deputy Speaker Vilma Santos Recto, as well as specific sector champions such as Deputy Speaker Lauren Legarda, whose resolution we will be hearing and tackling tomorrow in the committee. She has always been one of the most important patrons of the textile and heritage sector, so we are very blessed to have her among our ranks. And we also have Congresswoman Stella Kimbo, who is, of course, one of our lead economic minds in the lower house. But she's always so proud of the shoe industry of her district in her hometown of Marikina, and has become a de facto guiding light for the fashion industry since she's one of our fashion connoisseurs in the lower house. This has made it easier for us to reach out to stakeholders, and when they see us not only as being with them, but also being one of them. We also have members who are chairpersons of key lower committees, adding their own competencies to various aspects of developing the value chain of our creative economy. We're so blessed to have with us Chairperson Joey Salceda, Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, who has always been so sympathetic to the creative industries as being one of the prime movers of the fourth industrial revolution moving forward. And he, even in his draft of the stimulus bill or Bayanihan 2, already creative freelancers were included. So he also recognizes the importance of formalizing our creative freelancers into our local economy. And then, of course, we have Senior Vice Chairperson Sharon Garin, and both Congressman Joey and Congresswoman Sharon are actually two of my personal mentors. So I'm so grateful to them. And then you have the likes of Deputy Speaker Wes Gatchalian and Chairperson John Ray Tiangco of the Committee on Trade and Industry. Chairperson Sol Aragones of the Committee on Tourism, because creative economy directly links to tourism. Chairperson Victor Yap of the Committee on Information and Communications and Technology, who was actually one of the main authors of the creative industry bill that we are talking about right now. Chairperson Roman Romulo of the Committee on Basic Education and Culture, because there are intersectionalities between a creative industry and a cultural policy, and his input has been so valuable to all of our initiatives. And of course, our legal luminary and constitutionalist of the lower house, former law school dean, and now Deputy Speaker Rufus Rodriguez, who always keeps us in check whenever our proposals involve more difficult questions of law. I can stop here if I were to report only on the creative climate in the House, but as earlier mentioned, the support from the public and private sectors have been indispensable in our policy pursuits. It is not a coincidence that they are here with us today. From the government side, Undersecretary Fita Aldaba from the Competitiveness and Innovation Group of the DTI has been such a great mentor and champion and thought leader who we look up to for guidance in all of our initiatives. We are so grateful for her. She has shared with us not only her long years of experience as a researcher for government, but also her impactful and charismatic leadership in gathering the troops from the side of the executive. From the private sector, I cannot thank enough Paolo Mercado really, and the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines, whom I know has also been of great help to you guys through the 2018 Arangkada Creative Industries Policy Brief that he co-authored. I think we can all agree that Paolo is the definition of a true advocate who has graced our block not only with his expansive network of support from the various creative industry domains and sectors, but also his own personal knowledge and understanding of it. Congresswoman Lucy Torres Gomez, another member, our distinguished senior vice chair, has fondly called Paolo the North Star of our special committee, and I very much agree. Through this collection of brilliant and hardworking people from the lower house, the executive department, and the private sector, we are also making significant strides in legislating other industry pioneering policies for various creative domains. Although the Philippine Creative Industries Development Act is in the most advanced stage among all of them, as it is the pet bill of the bloc, other proposed laws are also well underway. Like I said, I came from a TWG on this bill, but we are in the process of institutionalizing a film and television tourism program for the Philippines. In a nutshell, film and television, or rather audiovisual tourism, is the concept of attracting tourists, whether local or foreign, to tourist destinations in the country by featuring such locations in films, series, and other forms of audiovisual media. How we are attracted to visiting the Republic of Korea through their K-dramas, Japan through their animes, Singapore through the film Crazy Rich Asians, these are all products of well-functioning film tourism programs in these countries, which provide both fiscal and non-fiscal incentives to producers who feature their most attractive locations. While this is already being implemented by the Film Development Council under its Film Philippines office, the lower house seeks to strengthen and improve upon the existing framework and address bottlenecks, most especially in funding. As we speak, the first technical working group meeting for this measure is currently being conducted and chaired by Congressman Yul Servonieto in another Zoom call. Through an institutionalized film and TV tourism program, we also seek to encourage capital to flow into our economy. Films have been proven to spur economic activity almost from out of nowhere. In New Zealand, tourist arrivals instantly doubled since the debut of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in 2001. Visitors of Wallace Monument in Scotland increased from 30,000 to 200,000 following the release of the movie Braveheart. Meanwhile, the release of Chinese film Lost in Thailand made China the largest source of overseas tourists in the country. In Cambodia, Tomb Raider has attracted tourists greater than what Angkor Wat can actually accommodate. Meanwhile, from 2012 to 2015, Game of Thrones, a hit American series, influenced the tourism in Dubrovnik, Croatia, which received 245,000 more arrivals from tourists, more than 1.5 million overnight stays, and almost 126 million euros in revenue. Since international tourists might not be coming in anytime soon, we can use this time to write, shoot, and produce films that are of high quality so that we can publish and distribute them just before the world opens up again. As mentioned, the proposed Film Tourism Act is undergoing deliberations by a technical working group, and you will be so interested to know that according to global tourism surveys, an international tourist, 8 out of 10 or 80% of them are influenced by the kind of content that they consume before they decide on what country they will visit. So this is a yet to be exploited area of our governance, and we are looking forward to crafting better policies in support of this objective. The lower house is also currently seeking to amend the amusement tax provisions under the local government code. Another sector hardest hit by the pandemic besides film is the live events industry. So we feel the need to embolden them through fiscal incentives as the stakeholders get back up on their feet. We saw this track as a viable option after discovering that our local government units are getting less than 1% of their annual budgets from amusement tax collections. And so this might be an opportunity for our LGUs to heed the call of these ailing sectors of our creative economy. While live events are great ways for featuring Filipino artists on stage, from bands, dancers, and theater performers, live events have likewise been great tools for the marketing of brands to a particular audience. Over recent years, we saw the rise of concerts, afternoon busks, and other similar gatherings that are being sponsored heavily by companies. It's also a way of bringing economic activities to previously underserved areas, such as La Union, up in the north. So much so that a successful Soul Surf Music Festival was able to pave a way for the surf town and creative hub that San Juan, La Union has become today. The live events industry is thus one of those more visible nexuses between business and creativity. We hope that by reducing the amusement tax rate, companies and artists can reunite towards producing live experiences for various audiences slowly, surely, and safely. This bill is currently pending with the Committee on Local Government for deliberations. Businesses and brands benefit greatly from a strong intellectual property regime. When trademarks and patents are protected, the integrity of brands are kept intact and technological innovations are encouraged. However, intellectual property rights also protect artists through copyrights. Because trademarks, patents, and copyrights are all protected under one code, which is the Intellectual Property Code, I think it's safe to assume that this next effort is something that we can all get behind. The lower house is currently in talks with the Intellectual Property Office, or the IPOFIL, for some major amendments to this 24-year-old law. The proposed changes seek to transform the IPOFIL from being perceived as a mere regulatory body to one having more developmental function towards industry building and growth. Under the proposal, IPOFIL will also develop a business development framework as well as an innovation center that teams up with educational institutions to explore prospects of growth through strategic tie-ups with the private sector. The bill is set for a technical working group meeting under the Committee on Trade and Industry. So to answer the simple question of whether the proposed Philippine Creative Industry Development Act will be approved by the lower house before the end of the year, my answer is a resounding yes. I don't see how and why not, considering that we have the best minds behind us. I take comfort in the fact that our House leadership under Speaker Lord Alan Velasco has thrown his full support behind our efforts as he himself is a proud member of ACHIB. I thank him for heeding our call to carve out significant funding in Bayanihan 2 to aid our vulnerable creative freelancers who were not able to enjoy any kind of support in Bayanihan 1 as they are neither formal employees nor are they part of the indigent sectors, but they are still very much vulnerable. I thank Speaker Lord for accommodating our institutional amendments to the 2021 budget in support of our creative sector, most especially for our road mapping initiatives through the Department of Trade and Industry that I'm very excited to embark upon. And I also thank him as well as his predecessor, former Speaker Alan Peter Cayetano, for giving ACHIB the legislative space beyond our advocacy group by providing us with a special committee to churn out measures and conduct inquiries that will benefit the creative community, such as tomorrow's inquiry on contraband indigenous textiles, which are allegedly flooding the market, and next week's inquiry on the rampant online piracy that plagued last year's Metro Manila Film Festival. I mean, if digital is going to be the next frontier for our creative industries, then we have to ensure that we have a strong intellectual property regime and that our intellectual property creators will be protected. We look forward to working closely with the executive branch and our colleagues in the Senate, most notably Senate President Tito Soto and our distinguished chairperson of Trade and Industry, Senator Coco Pimentel, who is with us here this afternoon, in achieving these pioneering reforms. With these seeds that we have planted, we trust that you, our stakeholders who remain constant regardless of who sits in power, will continue pursuing this uphill grind for major policy reforms using the same grit and tenacity that has made you all successful in business. While the Philippine Creative Industry Development Act is not a silver bullet piece of legislation, and much more needs to be done to address all the bottlenecks and pain points across the overall ecosystem and value chain of our creative economy, we take comfort in the fact that our tribe has once again increased with the tremendous support of the Joint Foreign Chambers and AmCham. As we always say in our weekly block meetings, together we will achieve. Thank you.
Chairman Toft, that was really a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. We learned not only about your bill on creative industries, but on 3 other important pieces of legislation. And we certainly hope that there's time to get many of these done in the remaining months of the 18th Congress. Let me now turn to our last but hardly the least speaker from the so-called upper house, the Senate or the smaller house, my friend, Senator Coco Pimentel, who is the chairman of the Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship Committee, as well as the Committee on Foreign Relations. And just like our speaker is finished, comes from prominent political heritage in the Philippines, going back 50 years to the time I first met his father when I first arrived at the US Embassy in 1971, when he was already distinguished himself for his championship of democracy and rule of law and local government, and then became himself a victim of martial law after 1972, until finally in the revolution of 1986, he emerged from Cagayan de Oro to become the Secretary of Local Government and then served 3 terms in the Senate. So we're looking forward to his son in the first Senate. The father and son have both served as president of the Philippine Senate. And I guess, Senator Coco, we're looking forward to your spending 3 terms like your dad and having a lot of signature legislation. The House has done a great deal of work on this bill, and we understand the essence of the bill is to create a council and an implementation plan. So we're very interested, if we assume that it gets done by the Easter break, what the Senate, I know you have many priorities in the Senate and in your committee, how we can support in your own hearings and the prospects in the Senate. We'd appreciate your views, and welcome to our forum today.
Thank you, John. And to save time, just let me greet all of you a pleasant good afternoon. Last weekend, as I was contemplating the appropriate introduction for this speech, I decided to browse Netflix, because Netflix is now the platform most closely associated with the creative industry. As I opened the app, the first thing that caught my attention was the top 10 shows in the Philippines today. They have such a classification. The list readily revealed that out of 10, only 1 content was actually produced in the Philippines and created by Filipinos. That's the House Arrest of Us. That's the title. 9 in the top 10 were predominantly Korean drama, Hollywood movies, and Chinese series, all foreign creations. 2 things came to my mind. First was content enrichment, and second was audience development. But to be honest, the story of watching Netflix did not really happen, my dear friends. It is my staff's attempt to come up with a creative introduction to this speech. Because that is what creativity is all about, using your imagination. But the concerns I mentioned, content enrichment and audience development, will be addressed by the proposed Creative Industries Charter, or Senate Bill number 411. So let me give you my perspective of the prospects of its passage in my chamber in the Senate. But before I proceed, allow me to thank the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines for organizing this event and for giving me this opportunity. The UN declared 2021 as the International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. For the Philippines and for the rest of the world, we are sure that 2021 is also targeted to be the year of economic recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. So these economic goals, I believe, are compatible. We now enter an era where people need more creative thinking, more problem solving, more innovation, more invention to create more jobs and generate more income. As I always say, we need to think outside of the box. Continuously innovating the business system must be our new normal. And one way to do it is to develop, enrich, and support the Philippine creative industries. The creative industry is seen to be a powerful force for our people's livelihood, economic recovery, and cultural preservation. According to a 2018 UNCTAD report, the Philippines generated some $915 million in creative goods and $3.2 billion in creative services. The creative economy has also been recognized as a significant contributor to GDP. Citing again the UNCTAD data, the creative industries are estimated to represent anywhere from 3 to 12% of global GDP. Furthermore, this sector accounts for a great source of trade and investment opportunities that open doors to more economic benefits for the labor sector and for our micro, small, and medium enterprises. Based on the recent report of the DTI, the creative industries employed 14.4% of the labor force. So as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, I am conscious, therefore, of the need to make creativity a national priority. It is for this reason that I support the Creative Industries Bill filed in the Senate. But this was filed before COVID. We should give credit where credit is due. The author is Senator Amy Marcos for being quite a visionary, because she filed this bill even before COVID, and now because of COVID, we need all the more the idea behind the bill. Senate Bill number 411 endeavors to create the Creative Industries Development Council that shall formulate and implement the development and promotion of original Filipino content and the protection and commercialization of Filipino intellectual property. The proposed bill addresses the need to create a separate and independent government arm that is focused solely on helping our creative industries. The CIDC, that is the council, will be the answer for the leadership that the significant sector has long been asking for or has long been looking for. This is important because with a central agency, there is a country level or national level strategy for our creative economy. When there is a national strategy like the National Creative Economy Development Plan envisioned by the bill, we can ensure that the marriage between Philippine culture and Filipino commerce would successfully result to a Philippine creative economy. And when there is a national plan in place, we can strategically position our national brand at the international level. Among the functions of the council as enumerated in the bill are to formulate programs and projects to protect, preserve, develop, and acquire historical, significant, and emerging properties and content, and to ensure the enforcement of intellectual property laws. This is an important provision of the bill. I agree that the presence of the CIDC will be instrumental in enriching original Filipino content and commercializing Filipino intellectual property. clearly, one central agency with the consolidated job to implement development programs for all creative industries is better than having too many collaborating government offices without well-defined roles, or worse, with overlapping jurisdictions. We all know that this leads to turf wars. Hopefully, we can now avoid a situation where the government programs and projects are often either duplicated, repeated, or even contradictory with each other. However, we must seriously study the proposed CIDC's function of ensuring the enforcement of intellectual property laws and reconcile it with the functions of the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines as mandated by RA 8293 as amended. Because we, as I've stated earlier, we do not want the turf wars or the clashing of jurisdictions. Under the proposed measure, creative industry shall comprise of the following, and I have counted them. There are 11 categories. Advertising and marketing. Number 2, animation and game development. Number 3, architecture and interior design. Number 4, broadcast arts, including film, television, radio, and photography. Number 5, information technology, software and computer services. Number 6, publishing. Number 7, museums, galleries, and libraries. Number 8, heritage crafts and activities, including gastronomy. Number 9, music and performing arts. Number 10, visual arts. And number 11, product, graphic, and fashion design. Okay. But I put in my footnotes that I am partial to separating photography as a separate category, as well as gastronomy. These two should be separate categories to emphasize. So arguably, defining the creative industry is a crucial legislative process. There is a need for the most updated and accurate data on the creative industries in the Philippines. I understand that the concerned agencies do not have yet the 2020 statistics. Truth be told, the sector is broad, and pandemic digitization even contributes to its diversification. Hence, it may be right to ask for more specificity, as creative industries have the tendency to overlap with other existing industries. So my committee has scheduled one more hearing on this bill, because I already heard this last September 3, 2019, no? A long time ago. So I've scheduled one more hearing this March 1, 2021 at 10 a.m. Okay, let us address all of these concerns that I have raised, aside from two sections that I have noticed from the Senate bill. I have not seen the House bill yet, the latest version of the House bill. So maybe by March 1, we can have a copy of the March bill, of the House bill, and then we can in the discussions, we can already take into consideration the improvements in the House bill. So Section 6 of the bill on support to creative entrepreneurs is truly empowering. The CIDC is mandated to provide support to creative entrepreneurs, companies, and artists in the form of startup capital, preferential loan, subsidized rentals for studio and venue, co-location, and shared workspaces, facilities, and hardware, etc. With the growing segment of millennials in the Filipino workforce, combined with their interest in technological devices and the internet, allow me to say this: creative entrepreneurship is the next big thing. It is even happening right now as we see the rising number of online content providers and app and game developers. People now sell ideas, people now buy ideas. So if you want our creative industries to grow, we must empower our young entrepreneurs, and we must capitalize on their creative ideas. I applaud the concept of local government and private sector participation found in sections 8 and 9 of the bill. The CIDC shall work with the LGUs for the establishment of local creative industry councils. So I call this provision the decentralization of creativity. With their role as the primary implementers of CIDC programs at the local level, the local councils can effectively spearhead audience development for local content. Within their respective jurisdictions, local councils can encourage the market or audience to embrace our own culture, to watch our own performances, to sing our own songs, to wear our own fashion, to enjoy our own kind of food, and to take pride in the Filipino brand. In return, the audience should expect enrichment of original Filipino content. It is okay to admire foreign creative culture, but Filipinos should aspire to create rather than emulate, to invent rather than duplicate. So in creativeness, let us not once again content ourselves with being the consumers that we are in many aspects of our lives. In creativeness, let us strive to be the creators ourselves. There is a statement I have encountered that by 2030, the Philippines will be the #1 creative economy in ASEAN in terms of size and value of our creative industries, as well as the competitiveness and attractiveness of our creative talent and content in international markets. The Senate Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship fully subscribes to this vision of creative economy roadmap crafted by the DTI and the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines. So I therefore assure our creative industries, all the stakeholders therein, that the Senate is your partner towards achieving sustainable creative economy in our country. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
And Senator, let me say walang anuman for your inspiring remarks today. And that's a very tight time schedule. I'm wondering what Chairman Davanicia can say about delivering a third reading bill before your hearing on March 21.
It doesn't have to be a formal transmittal, John, because that this is a Senate hearing. So the different drafts from the House, their latest improvement or the latest update on the bill, we can use as one of our reference materials. They don't need to transmit that. The House does not need to transmit that formally to the Senate. So the office of Tof de Venecia can transmit it to my office at any time before March 1.
Actually, Mr. Forbes, if I may, I already got in touch with Senator Coco, and our office will be presenting to him the latest version of the House bill. And we look forward to greater cooperation with the Senate for this particular initiative. Our bill has been referred to the Committee on Appropriations, since there is an appropriations component to it. So I'm sure that will take a while. But again, we enjoy the support of our House leadership for this in certifying it as a priority measure for the lower house. So we'll just be working with as many people to get this bill passed as soon as possible in third and final reading.
Well, my comment is fantastic. And I'm really encouraged to hear both the infusion of some unique Filipino culture into the entire world, but also when you do copycat and you create the jobs here, you're also adding to the economy. So there's no reason, it seems to us, that creative industries can do both copy and create and inform the world of more about the Philippines. We're entering our open forum period, which is a little bit shorter, and I know we have some concluding remarks coming from the president of the Management Association of the Philippines, Gigi Mantanola. I see we have a few questions here. There's a question to both Chairman Davanicia and Chairman Pimentel. What role can treaties and trade agreements play in providing creative industries greater access to international markets? So would either one of you or even Paula want to take that question, or Fita at DTI? What role can treaties and trade agreements play in providing creative industries greater access to international markets?
Can I attempt to answer that question?
Yep, certainly. Everyone can. Thank you.
Well, we had a meeting recently with the Department of Trade and Industry with regards to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between ASEAN and key member states, and there will be free trade agreements in play with regards to obtaining raw materials, in which it's been identified for the Philippines that our comparative advantage is really the value added by creativity or our creative talent. So I suppose the FTAs and our treaties will play a very important role in achieving the objectives that we've set for the development of our creative economy. I can't get into details just yet. That was discussed to us in an executive session, so maybe there's some details that would be confidential, but I would imagine that even in sectors such as film, we do have those FTAs and regional cooperations with regards to film distributions, marketing, and other areas of value chain that are specifically relevant to our creative industry players.
John?
Yes, sir.
Because actually there is no creative industry that you can point to. Right now, the components of this creative industry are distributed in 11 categories all over the economy. So, for example, that regional free trade agreement between ASEAN plus 5 ASEAN partners would allow the exercise of professionals in those other countries. So, architects, who are in the creative industry. So, of course, there will be some advertising also there. So you see, because right now we have not yet organized formally the creatives industry. So they're all over. They're all over the economy or the other Philippine industry. So treaties, other international agreements can play a role, and RCEP is going actually to play a role in helping the players, stakeholders or the participants in the creative industry.
Could I ask Senator, since you chair Foreign Relations, how long do you think it will take to approve it? It doesn't really come into effect until the parties all have approved it.
Yes, the timetable is the middle of this year. That will be my Committee on Foreign Relations is anticipating that will be part of our agenda already by middle of this year. Hopefully, we will. At any rate, when the Senate ratified the latest treaty referred to us, it took us just 2 months, including the Christmas holiday. So, if RCEP is well explained, especially when the benefits for entering into the treaty are well explained, I do not see any opposition to the treaty.
Do any other speakers want to comment on these issues? Paulo, I think your hand is up.
Yes, I was thinking about the question in two forms. One is on the output, on creative outputs, and let's say the free flow of free trade of creative outputs between the Philippines and other countries. And currently, actually, I hear more comments on from certain content industry sectors for greater, if I may use the word, protectionism rather than greater trade. It's the opposite, in fact, that I hear from the local ones, who complain about unfair. And this is related to what Senator Pimentel was saying earlier about audience development for domestic creative content is needed, because then our local creators feel it is unfair advantage that these big productions come here. And for example, this will be a hot issue when cinemas open in March. How likely is it that Filipino films would be the priority of these cinema houses to display? Most likely they will prioritize the big blockbusters to be able to earn from the seats. So on the one hand, there is already free flow of content. The challenge is that local Filipino audiences prefer, in fact, the foreign big blockbuster content to local content. And then the second problem on the other side is that Filipino content lacks market development outside. So from a content challenge point of view, it's really more how do we increase the appreciation of Filipino content both inside and outside. The other part of it, though, is a bit more tricky. And this has to do with, for some creative industries, there is no restriction to foreign investments. But for others, there are very clear restrictions on foreign investment or ownership of creative industries in the Philippines. So that's not so much a treaty. It's really more the local laws that we have on these restrictions. And it's a different sector. So media still needs to be 100% Filipino owned. Advertising has to be 60% Filipino owned. So the question is, are these restricting opportunities for greater foreign investment into the Philippines? I can say from experience, for example, that we are not, even if the Philippines has many world-class business leaders in advertising, some of them currently having global leadership roles in their respective advertising networks, the Philippines will not be a regional hub for them precisely because of the ownership structure that we have. So there are those things that will become more tricky. So it's not so much a treaty, it's more of the ownership of business.
If we have time, I'd make the observation that when Chairman Garbin's RBH2 comes out to the floor, you could remove the language unless otherwise provided by law from the current restriction on 70-30 in advertising. And if that were eventually approved by both House and Senate, and that's a big if, you could actually have that openness for advertising next year. In which case, I know you've advocated before, Paulo, that Manila, the Philippines, could become a major advertising hub globally. That's something to think about. Just a comment I'm making. I'm not going to ask Senator Coco how RBH2 in the Senate's going to go, because we attended the hearing on that 2 weeks ago, and I think the senators are more cautious than the members of the House, but still it's a very important reform to eventually get to.
And we're still bogged down by the process, not yet the substance.
The substance may be
voting
easier than
jointly
the
or
process.
separately. If I may, Mr. Forbes, very quickly, I do remember Chairman Joey Salceda sharing in one of his always well put together slides that among the sectors that will greatly benefit from this economic charter change would be our creative industry sectors, most especially media, advertising, and some others that I can't remember at the moment. So it's something, it's sort of like a prospect that does excite And I remember him specifically mentioning that our creative industries in some sectors are quite cash strapped and can benefit from the infusion of foreign direct investment. So yeah, whatever happens with this initiative, we look forward to the creative sector being able to exploit and benefit from all these reforms.
Well, let me ask one more question because we're running out of our, we're really at the appointed time that I turn to Gigi Montanola to wrap it up. But there's an important question that comes out, how the legislation will support the disadvantaged sectors, people with disabilities, handicapped, indigenous communities, and indigent creators. Does anybody want to take that question?
John, I think that is a detail left to the CIDC to that's why we're forming a council to be more familiar with the industry over which it has a jurisdiction, so that if they can come up with a program for these PWDs or a special or a subsector, then they can do so because they have been empowered.
Yeah, there's an answer. Florinda, I hope that answer
John?
is acceptable to you. Yes, yes.
John, yeah, very quickly. I think the bill is important because apart from the changes that would be implemented in terms of integrating all the different agencies together, coming up with roadmaps wherein we will all be aligning our policies and programs, but at the same time, the funding that through the bill would become possible in order for us to really focus our efforts towards providing more support to people who right now, of course, are at a more disadvantaged position. And hence, I think the bill would really create a lot of difference in terms of developing the industry, in terms of improving its competitiveness, as well as leading towards a more inclusive development. And let me also mention on the free trade agreements. I think we have a strong chance. We have a strong comparative advantage in creative services, and that has been shown by, though our statistics are not yet that robust, but from the initial analysis, we're seeing really a strong performance, particularly coming from the creative services sector. And with RCEP, for instance, that's a market of 2.2 billion people. And also these countries, they comprise 28% of world trade, 30% of world GDP, 34% of outward FDI. So it's not just the market access that we are after, but as well as the investments that could come to the country, especially since one barrier to the creative industry is it would require really a huge amount of capital, and hence we would really welcome foreign investors to come in. And so really it's critical, it's crucial that we be able to improve the competitiveness of our creative sector, because all these advantages or benefits or gains, potential gains, we would not be able to reap them if we're not able to prepare our creative sectors properly. Thank you.
John.
Thank you, Senator.
Specific answer to the question, no? To the last question. So look at section 5 of the Senate bill, subparagraph F. This is the section 5 is on the powers, no? So one of the powers of the council is support the training of a creative workforce in order to expand employment opportunities through scholarship, artist in residence programs, workshops, apprenticeship, networking events, and subsidized studios and living spaces. Okay, the language of paragraph F we can we can now amend the language to address the substance of the question asked. So we can do there. We can put the what term did you use? The marginalized sector, the disadvantaged players, people, persons with disabilities in the creative sector. So we can. I have already seen the paragraph where we can now insert the language.
I have it right here, and I'll share it with the lady that asked the question, Senator. Thank you very much. It's hard to see hands up, but I don't see any hands up. I think we've answered the questions. If there are more, we will try to do it offline because everybody has something else to do this afternoon. The day is not over in the era of Zoom meetings. May I turn? Am I correct?
Yeah.
All right. Unless there's objection to this, I move that we turn to our good friend, President of the Management Association of the Philippines, Gigi Montanola, who certainly, Gigi, are you still with us? I'll do a brief
I've been listening for the past almost 2 hours. So.
Oh, fantastic. Oh my God. Fantastic. But can I quickly introduce you? I mentioned your role as president this year for the Management Association of the Philippines. But we also know you in your career as president of the BPI and the Bankers Association of the Philippines, and now since retiring as chair of the Far East University and having the responsibility to help educate 35,000 young Filipinos. I did not realize you're now chairing the Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundation. I knew you were in your context as the WWF Philippine National Advisory Council Chair, and I didn't know that you were the head of the National Golf Association. So you're really multitasking. So we look forward to your concluding comments. Thanks, Gigi.
Well, I think when you retire, they try to figure out all kinds of jobs for you to do. But anyway, Senator Pimentel, Congressman De Venecia, USAID-RESPOND, Director Manuel Paulo Mercado. On behalf of the Management Association of the Philippines, I'd like to thank you all for sharing your time and expertise with us today. I'd also like to thank AmCham and USAID for organizing today's webinar. And naturally, a special thanks to John Forbes and to Jeff Gobel of USAID. MEP has been one of Arangkada's main advocacy partners. As a matter of fact, MEP is one of the sponsors of the pre-COVID 2018 Arangkada policy brief on creative industries. We in the MEP believe that promoting creative industries as a priority economic sector will help generate high-value jobs, contribute to the country's GDP growth, expand international export of Filipino creative products and services, and enhance our nation's intellectual property capital. On a personal basis, just listening to all of the good presentations, three things came to mind. The first is that the Filipino, we all know, is a very creative person and is very good in the service industry. The second is that on a relative basis, the creative industries are still asset light, but people heavy. So it's very good for jobs in the country. And third, the creative industries are our window to the world. So again, that's very good on the external basis, and particularly to bring in foreign tourism, whether it be physically or virtually. So we support Bill. We wish both Congressman De Venecia and Senator Pimentel good luck in the respective committees. I'm sure it's not going to be an easy task. I think going back to what someone said, I think it was Paulo Mercado, I think the whole discussion, I wouldn't even use the word debate, is between opening up for the greater good or protecting a few industries which have done well in the past, but we would like to expand it to the future. No? I saw numbers like $1 billion. But look at I was also around when both the remittance workers started. So that went from 0 or 2 in the 80s to $30 billion. And I also saw the rise of the BPOs, which also has risen from about 5 billion to about 25. No? So good luck to all of you. And hopefully we will all have a bill that everybody can not only live with, but will be good for the 11 creative industries that Senator Pimentel spoke of. So good luck and thank you for inviting me.
And on that note, I thank everybody today. Let's give a greater round of applause to all of us. Can we do a final photograph? This is one of the things we always do. We stand in front of the camera, but now we just have to stare at the camera. And our staff will, you want to take this over, Sarah, our photographer?
Yes, sir. Tin and I will be taking the photo. Everybody ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, let's take one more just to be sure. Okay. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, I think that's good.
We'll try to send you a souvenir photograph. Salamat po, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Great afternoon.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye.
Bye.